Hey guys, what's up? My name is Gabby. Welcome back to my channel, and today I'm going to be doing a book talk for A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara. I finished reading it just a couple days ago, and it took me about a week to finish this book. My copy is 815 pages. I haven't been able to stop thinking about it, and so I wanted to make a full book talk to talk about it because I have so many feelings about it. The beginning part of this book talk is going to be spoiler free, and then I'm going to be jumping into some spoilery content so I can talk about all of my feelings about this book. I will warn you well before I jump into the spoilery section of this. I do feel like I need to warn people that this probably is the most depressing book I've ever read in my life. At the same time, it's something I'll never be able to stop thinking about, and like these characters have made such an impression on me that this is like one of the best reading experiences I think that I've ever had. This book is just written so freaking gorgeously, and it invests you in the lives of these characters so much. I've just never read anything like this before that just made me feel so much for these characters. If you aren't aware, this book is a contemporary fiction novel, and it is a literary novel, which isn't something I normally read, but lately I've been reading it a lot, and I do find myself enjoying it more and more with the more literary fiction that I'm reading. And I think that this book is going to be a classic. I think it definitely has the potential to be a modern classic. I mean, it just came out in 2015, but it's already being talked about so much, and it's so well deserved of all the hype that it's received. If you don't know what this book is about, it follows this group of 4 boys from their 20s throughout the rest of their lives pretty much, and follows Jude is the main character of this story. He's this black guy who is handicapped. He can walk on his legs, but he has a lot of issues with his legs, and sometimes he has to walk with a cane. He's basically the main character of this story. All of his friends kind of revolve around his story. And then his 3 closest friends are Willem, who is his roommate and probably his closest friend out of the 3 of them. He's an aspiring actor. And then there's JB, who is this artist who's also low-key kind of a drug addict, and he is gay, and he comes from Haiti, and he just really loves his family. And then we have Malcolm. He wants to become an architect, and he's kind of struggling with his identity and his sexuality, and he doesn't know who he is. All of these characters are so well fleshed out, and they feel like the most vivid and real characters I might have ever read in a book, because I feel like since this book is so long, it's very much a character study on Jude and his life. And so I feel like I've literally experienced all of Jude's life with him. And I do want to put a warning at the very beginning of this and just say there are trigger warnings in this book for pretty much everything you can imagine, but there are some pretty graphic things in this book that I feel like you do need to be warned about. And this isn't a spoiler about the book either, it's just I feel like you should know going in that not only is this like a really depressing book, but there's a lot of abuse in this book in all forms, mentally, physically, sexually. There's drug abuse, there's child abuse, there's rape, there's cutting, there's suicidal thoughts. It's just incredibly sad and hard to read at times is what I'm trying to say, but just the writing itself is really beautiful. I normally find myself skim reading through a lot of books that are this length because you just kind of want to get to the important parts, but with this book it was like I wanted to read every single word, because even stuff that seems like it's filler that are in like the paragraph sections of this where there's no dialogue, it's written so beautifully and it's all so thought-provoking that it's like it's worth all of it, you know? Like, it's worth like reading every single word. I think my favorite character in this book is Willem, because he's just so sweet and he's incredibly patient when it comes to Jude and his friends, and he's arguably the most caring person in their group of friends, and he just really loves his friends, and he has a lot of really great moments in this book. Willem and Jude's friendship is what really drives the story in this, and their friendship is just the cutest. Like, I loved them in this book. They were just so cute. I know a lot of people have referred to this book as tragedy porn. It's all depressing and there's no like silver lining. I think that's wrong to just classify this book as tragedy porn and like that makes it bad. Like, stories can still be good even if they're depressing and have tragedy in them, and this book definitely does. But I don't know if you can see all the like tabs I've made in this book. Like, I dog-eared so many pages and just like wrote all over this book. Like, there's literally markings on almost every single page. If you couldn't tell already from this review, I gave this book 5 out of 5 stars, and it's probably one of the best books I've ever read. I don't know if I'm ever gonna have the heart to ever reread this, but that's why I want to make a video like this discussing it so I can remember what I love so much about it. I'm gonna jump into some spoilery content now, so if you haven't read it, please go read it or at least consider reading it. Just know that this is a very heavy character-driven story and it's very depressing, but it's just so touching and beautiful, and these characters, you'll fall so in love with them, and I just highly recommend it. So give this book a shot, go out there and read it, and then we can come back and discuss it. And for those of you who have read it, let's jump into some spoilery content. So warning, this is your last warning, click away, spoilers. So I think by far for me the hardest part of reading this book was probably Jude's cutting scenes, especially when they started to get out of hand, and like the way that he dealt with them by like going to Andy all the time, and the way Andy never really knew what to do about it. Like it was just really like devastating and really hard to read. Like those were the parts that I found the most hard to read. And then of course, you know, there's reading all of Jude's flashbacks with brother Luke and how he like took him from the brother's home and he went on the run with him, and he visited all these motels and basically sold him into prostitution at a very young age. And the fact that he manipulated Jude into thinking that that was what they had to do in order to survive. Manipulated Jude into having sex with him because he's like, this is what people do when they love each other, don't you love me? Like guilting him like that, like whew. And then don't even get me started on Dr. Trailer. The scene when he had him in the basement, you know, and this is when he was like a teenager at this point, but then we find out what actually happened to his legs, like why he has leg problems, and it was because fucking Dr. Trailer actually ran over his legs with the car when he was trying to get away. Like, I just felt so bad for Jude. Like literally that one scene when the elevator wasn't working in his building and he was like freaking out, and then he had to like attempt to climb the stairs by himself, and he had to climb like 50 fucking stories or something. Oh my god, my poor baby child. Not to mention fucking Caleb. Okay, like when Jude was first introduced to Caleb, I got so excited because I was like, finally Jude is gonna have someone in his life that's like a love interest and someone who can help take care of him. And then what the fuck, Caleb turned out to be this abusive, disgusting, fucking hated Caleb. And mostly the main reason why I hated Caleb is because he convinced Jude that he's undeserving of love and that he is disgusting, and it's like he's already been thinking those things about himself, and then you just confirmed all of his fears. How could you do that to somebody? Like, can't you see how broken of a person Jude already is? And not to mention when JB made fun of Jude and he was like, we're all sick of you, whatever, like that was not okay, and that literally ended their friendship. And I can see why, because Jude is already feeling so broken and so insecure about who he is and like being handicapped and not being able to do things for himself. One part that I really enjoyed was Willem when it was like part of his narration when he was talking about friendship and how society is so obsessed with being in a relationship by a certain age, and like if you're not in a relationship by a certain age then something must be wrong with you. And I just love his whole passage about how he's like, why can't friendship be enough? Why do we need a relationship with another person? Like I really enjoyed that passage. I also love little glimpses into when Jude was studying law and how he wanted to become a lawyer, and like there was that one quote when they said, fairness is for happy people, for people who have been lucky enough to have lived a life defined more by certainties than by ambiguities. There was that part when Harold said that he was going to adopt Jude, and it was like, oh my god, finally, thank god, someone's gonna adopt Jude. We get that backstory on Harold that said that he had a son named Jacob, and Jacob died when he was like a kid. And that freaking quote, this is on page 187 in my copy, but that quote when he's like, you have never known fear until you have a child, and maybe that is what tricks us into thinking that it is more magnificent, because the fear itself is more magnificent. Every day your first thought is not, I love him, but how is he? I would hold him in my arms and wait to cross the street and would think how absurd it is that my child, that any child could expect to survive this life. Like he's talking about that when your child dies you feel everything that you would expect to feel, da da da. And he's like, but here's what no one says. When it's your child, a part of you, a very tiny but nonetheless unignorable part of you, also feels relief, because finally the moment you've been expecting, been dreading, and been preparing yourself for since the day you became a parent has come. You tell yourself it's arrived, here it is, and after that you have nothing to fear again. Like after the moment your child dies, as a parent, you literally have nothing to fear ever again. Isn't that the most eerie and like depressing quote you've ever heard in your life? I couldn't stop thinking about that quote, and I still haven't been able to stop thinking about that quote. Like it left me so freaking shook after I read that. I was just like, whoa. And again with Willem, with his questioning society and their obsession with relationships, I love how he's like, how was one to be an adult? Was couplehood truly the only appropriate option? Thousands of years of evolutionary and social development, and this is our only choice. I can't help but like agree with Willem so hard. Why is it so unaccepted and inappropriate in society to not be married by a certain age? Like, what is the big deal? Like, you know, people are obsessed. All of his friends are going up to Jude all the time and being like, aren't you ever lonely? Why don't you want to be with someone? Don't you want to have someone in your life? Like, don't you want a boyfriend or a girlfriend or whatever? Jude's narration in his head, kind of in response to all of this, was so great. And it was when he said sometimes he wonders whether this very idea of loneliness is something he would feel at all had he not been awakened to the fact that he should be feeling lonely, that there is something strange and unacceptable about the life that he has. Always there are people asking him if he misses what it had never occurred to him to want, never occurred to him he might want to have. It's just, it's worded so beautifully in the way he's like, either way, being single at 40 is different from being single at 30, and with every year it becomes less understandable and more pathetic and more inappropriate. You know, I think what's sad too is the fact that Jude thinks that a relationship on top of everything else he has going for in his life is a privilege, and it's something that he doesn't deserve to have, you know, because he says to wish for companionship along with everything else he has seems a kind of greed, a gross entitlement. He thinks his life is great just because he's not being abused right now. Like, isn't that so fucking sad? Like, he doesn't think he deserves more out of life because this is enough. Not being abused is enough for him. Here's the part I've really been wanting to talk about. Fucking Willem and Jude. Oh my god. I said from the beginning, I was like, I would ship Willem and Jude so hard. I don't know why, I just had assumed that Willem was straight because they hadn't really talked about his sexuality a lot in this book, and he had always had girlfriends around him, so I was just like, why shouldn't he just be with Jude? Like, him and Jude would be so cute together, and like, what the fuck are they wasting their time for? And then of course, by the time they reach their like 40s, Willem realizes that he has feelings for Jude, and it's just like, Willem and Jude are the biggest fucking OTP maybe ever. Like, I loved them. Like, that section of the happy years when Willem and Jude were finally together, it was like the happiest moment of this book for me. Like, I literally adore them together, and it was so sad to see them fight, you know, because they were fighting because Jude was still cutting himself and because they wanted to have sex, but like Jude didn't want to have sex. Like, Jude doesn't like sex anymore because of all the sexual abuse he's had in his life, which is understandable, but then it's sad because like, of course Willem still wants him, he wants to have sex with him, and Jude gives him permission to go to other people to have sex because of how much he hates sex. And like, they find out that after they stopped having sex, Jude started cutting himself a lot less, and it was just like, that's so sad that even if it is someone that he loves, it's still so hard for him because of all the abuse he's experienced in his life, and the way he just like connects it automatically and just goes like completely rigid, and it's just so sad. My poor little baby Jude. Oh my god, that conversation they had was so fucking intense when they kind of had their fight, and he's like, stop trying to fix me, Willem, and he's like, oh yeah, sorry if I'm not living up to being the ideal boyfriend, Jude. I know you prefer your relationships heavy on the sadism, right? Maybe if I kicked you down the stairs a few times, I'd be living up to your standards. Willem! Holy fuck, that is not okay. And then Jude responds with, I'm not hemming, Willem. I'm not going to be the cripple you get to save for the one you couldn't. About Willem's brother who died because he was a cripple, like, like they were throwing some fucking fire in that conversation. Like, I couldn't even breathe. That was really interesting when there was this one part where they were talking about how relationships never provide you with everything you need. They only provide you with some things. And I don't know if you guys think this is true or not, but I just found this passage really interesting. It's on page 642 in my copy, but it says, relationships never provide you with everything. They provide you with some things. You take all the things you want from a person, sexual chemistry, let's say, or good conversation, or financial support, or intellectual compatibility, or niceness, or loyalty, and you get to pick 3 of those things. 3, that's it. Maybe 4 if you're lucky, and the rest you have to look for somewhere else. Do you guys think that's true? I think that's a really interesting perspective on relationships. Towards the end of this book, I got really fucking emo, because at the end of the happy years, Willem gets in a car accident and he dies, and he like flies through the windshield and hits his face so hard against the tree that he breaks all the bones in his face. And it's like, of course, because, you know, Willem and Jude are happy, so of course something has to happen so that Jude just gets sent back into his serious depression and suicidal thoughts, right? When Willem died, I like died a little bit inside. Like, I was so devastated. The fact that Jude had said he couldn't even identify him by his face because his face got so fucked up in the car wreck. He said he had to identify him from the birthmark on his left calf. Like, oh my god. This book just described grief in a way that I've never really read before. Like, I think it was just so accurate how grief is experienced, you know? I also love how Jude had this one quote where he said that he felt like life is something that has happened to him rather than something he has any role in creating. And I think that says a lot about his character and why he is the way he is, because he feels like his life is something that has happened to him and something he hasn't really had any control over. The very last section of this book is told from Harold's point of view, and it just kind of like fucking killed me because I knew that Jude had killed himself, because I was like, why else would this be told from Harold's point of view, you know? The fact that like Harold went through this thing when he said how hard it is to keep alive someone who doesn't want to stay alive, and like, do you even have the right to try and, you know, keep someone alive if they don't want to be alive, you know? Like, is it even the right thing to do as a human being? And he's like, first you try logic, you have so much to live for, and then you try guilt, you owe me, and then you try anger and threats and pleading, I'm old, don't do this to an old man. But then once they agree, it is necessary that you move into the realm of self-deception, because you can see that it is costing them. You can see how much they don't want to be here. You can see that the mere act of existing is depleting for them. You pounce upon the happy moments, you hold them up as proof. See, this is why it's worth living. This is why I've been making him try, even though that one moment cannot compensate for all the other moments, the majority of the moments. That brings up a really good point, you know? Like, if somebody wants to kill themselves so badly, like, is it even the right thing to do to try and stop them? Like, it's literally draining for them to stay alive. It's just so fucking devastating, oh my god. And then, like, the last page, when he's like thinking, like he sees Jude and everything, and he's like, maybe he is that cloud, that wave, that rain, that mist. It isn't only that he died or how he died, it is what he died believing. And so I try to be kind to everything I see, and in everything I see him. Oh my god. Jude died leaving that note to Harold and Julia with like the confession of what had happened with Dr. Trailer and with Brother Luke, and he wrote this apology saying, I'm so sorry you never knew what I was, as if he wasn't deserving of their love in the first place. Like, the fact that he died still thinking that he wasn't good enough. This book fucked me up. Loved this book so much, and it's gonna stay heavy on my heart for a really long time. And the fact like that this is called A Little Life, I mean, I know that they mentioned that quote, a little life, a couple times in this book, and I noticed it. It's when one of the moments was disturbing. It was when Brother Luke was like selling him into prostitution, and he was like, you can't just lay there and be numb while they're fucking you. You have to show them a little life. And I was like, oh my god. Like, is that why this book is called that? Like, that is fucking awful. Later on in the book, it says it again when he says, when he started dating Caleb, and he's like, if only he hadn't approached Caleb that night, if only they hadn't talked, because then he could just go back to living his little life. It's almost as if this title implies that Jude sees his own life as a little life, and like it's not relevant or important. Or it's just saying like, here's a little slice of life of this life that Jude had. I don't know, I just love how this title can be interpreted so many different ways, and it's just so perfect. So yeah, this book just killed me and ripped my heart out, and now I'll never enjoy anything ever again. Thank you for watching this really fucking long, probably book talk. And what do you guys think about this book? Have you read it? I mean, if you're still watching, I hope you've read it by this point. And what are your thoughts on it? What were your favorite parts? What were the like saddest moments for you? And what do you think about this book in its entirety? And yeah, let's talk about it in the comments. I just know I want to talk about it and get all my feels out, so let's talk. And thank you guys so much for watching as always, and I will see you guys next time.
Another night in my new skin, throw emotion to the wind.